and I like to look at renewals like, yes, reflect back, but the most important part of renewal and the thing that always excited me was looking forward. What are you going to do your next 5 years, your next 10 years? It should be a non-event. The authorizer knows how the school's doing. The school knows how they're doing. They're on track.
You're listening to the Bold by Choice podcast with Vashanta Harris and Jim Gunner. Real talk about charter schools, from the boardroom to the classroom. Powered by the National Charter Schools Institute.
Welcome back, friends. We are here again at the Bold by Choice podcast, where we help educators transform student outcomes by providing real-world strategies, inspiring stories, and insights that empower you to create high-quality learning environments. I'm your friend and colleague, Vashanta Harris.
And I'm Jim Gunner, and we want to say welcome back to returning listeners and hello to new ones. This season, we're exploring what it really means to support a charter school, from birth to renewal, or even closure, though we don't want to do too much of that. Today, we're unpacking the life cycle of a charter school and why understanding it deeply matters for every authorizer, every school leader, every parent. And introducing the passionate people at the National Charter Schools Institute who help schools survive and thrive at every stage. We got a special guest today, Mary Bradley, who brings a wealth of experience from the field to this conversation. Mary, welcome to Bold by Choice.
Thanks, Jim and Vashanta. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
I feel like we should have played like the champ is here. It's like Mary's here. One of the champs is on the line today. It's so cool.
Well, doesn't Chicago have some songs?
Mary, what's like your favorite song from your days in Chicago?
My favorite music from Chicago is for sure all the live music. So whether it's in the parks, in different neighborhoods, but also, just the music, I got to go to a lot of musicals, and Hamilton is one of my favorite. And so I would say that's my favorite music from my Chicago time.
Mary, speaking of parks, is it true that the new Pope is a White Sox fan?
That's what I hear. That's true.
All right. General absolution for all the Cubs fans. Okay, we should get back to Bold by Choice, Vashanta.
Oh, I love it. Well, Mary, as you can tell, we're super excited that you're here with us today. Now, one of the things that I am particularly excited about is that you have a very unique journey from literally like teaching and leading authorizer work, both in Chicago and in Michigan, and now at the Institute. Your history and your journey is so rich and inspiring. So Jim and I have the distinct pleasure to know you really well, but we want to invite you to share a little bit more about who you are with our guests. So share with us how your personal and professional path have led you to this work.
Yeah. So my journey in education started as a special education teacher. And through that experience, I looked across the system I was in, but also outside of that, and went to a lot of different schools, saw a lot of different programs. And I just thought that we were falling short for the students and families who need it the most. And so that experience kind of lit a fire in me. And I knew we could do more. And I knew that, there's other ways I could impact, the kind of the education ecosystem. So, decided to go to law school and figure that out as I went. After that, journey with teaching and finishing up law school, I ended up at Central Michigan University's charter office, which was a really great experience of how we can impact families and communities across the state of Michigan. And really was able to bring that intersection of education, policy, and, really having that impact in communities. And from there, it took me to Chicago Public Schools and been able to, really understand the district, the city, understanding what families and communities needed, and what that looks like and how charters are part of that whole ecosystem across the city. And I think that's what's really important. And I always say this is like, we shouldn't be doing things to families. We should be doing them with families. And even my transition throughout my time in Chicago, that we were able to, bring that to reality. And so whether it was my work with charter schools or also with forming new district schools, new models across the city, and especially communities such as the South and West Side that needed more options. And so through charters and also new district models, we were able to bring even greater options and choices to families. And I think that's what the key is are families having options in communities that best meet the needs of their child.
Absolutely. I love that you underscored. How did you just say it? We can't keep doing things to families and communities, but we have to do things with them. So I love that concept. I'm so glad you brought that out.
Hey, Mary, I'm trying to convince authorizers that they are guardians of opportunity and stewards of possibility. Can you see a vision for that?
Absolutely. I think, too often people see their role as a title, as a form of like, this is my responsibility. And I think that they narrowly focus on certain things. I think when we see ourselves as more of, we can open up opportunities. We can make sure that things are right and go beyond even sometimes what we believe our scope is getting involved in things like, is our policies, in our practices across the state or across a city, welcoming and really focused on, opening up those opportunities, those possibilities, and pushing it a little bit. So the original idea of charter schools was to not be part of the status quo. And I think sometimes it's easy to fall into that. And I think the more we can push and say, remember what this is for, remember what we're trying to accomplish here, and go back to those original intents, I think is a really important thing.
Absolutely. And today our topic is very rooted in that, right? One of the things we talked about last week was the fact that families, communities, teachers, leaders, folks could really have a vision for something new they want to see in terms of a school in their community, and they can create that. And that's the beauty, one of the beauties of our charter environment. And charters, we've kind of started to say like they have a life cycle. So there is a bit of a process, right, that is involved with making sure that a charter is able to be designed, implemented, and then operated well. And so let's start at the top. What do we even mean when we say the life cycle of a charter school?
Yeah, when we talk about the life cycle of a charter school, we're really talking about the entire journey of a school. From that early spark of an idea to open a school through its launch, the growth, renewal, and ultimately long-term sustainability. So a school always starts with an idea. That idea is proposed in form of a application to start a charter, and then it's that authorizer can make that decision as that idea can be codified in the form of a charter agreement. And really that charter agreement is a promise. That is a promise to families and communities that, we're going to start this school and it can, move forward. So that idea is then, like I said, codified in the form of an agreement. And that promise becomes real. That idea then moves into execution, pre-opening activities, making sure that the school is ready to open on day one, like it's been operating for years. And when they're ready to open, it becomes operational to fulfill that original promise. And I think that promise is first and foremost the responsibility of school leadership and the board to oversee. And then, also the authorizer has a role in that of oversight. So there's several layers of making sure that promise is fulfilled. And the authorizer does play a key role in that. They annually assess how the school is doing once it's open, according to their expectations, and they make decisions on whether they are granted another charter contract. And so it's really that whole life cycle of that starting from an idea, being codified in a charter agreement, into pre-opening, making sure that the school is ready to open, and then the annual review, both by the school and the board, but then also by the authorizer. And then it usually ends up in that decision, typically every 5 years, of whether that promise is being fulfilled and they can be granted another charter contract.
Mary, I want to dig into that promise. When I hear people talk about charters, I often hear them say a charter is a legal agreement between the authorizer and the board, and you got to fulfill the terms and conditions and comply with all applicable law. You're talking about a promise. I try and make the distinction between the covenant of the charter and the contract of the charter. You're even an attorney, right? What's the difference, and why does that matter so much if you're really into this?
So I view the charter as laying out the expectations I always refer to it as, hey, this is the expectations between you and the authorizer. There's a floor, right? That you need to meet these. The promise is really what was originally set out in the original idea and through the application and through the approval process. And that promise is, I think, even far greater than the charter agreement, because it's saying like, we are going to provide this to students and families. We are going to promise them what we set out to do. And I think that's a really important, when I work with schools and boards, I always tell them, like, they've been operating for, let's say, 10 years. I would say, go back to your original promise in your application. Look at what you said you were going to provide to families in the community in your application, and really understand and assess, are you fulfilling on that promise? So yes, you need to pay attention. Are you fulfilling the authorizers, requirements in the charter agreement? Are you meeting their expectations? But strong schools are always going back to that original promise and saying, like, are we doing what we said we were going to do? And I think that's really important.
Yeah, we need to keep rolling in the life cycle, Mary, but it brings me back to my days at Central Michigan University. And I'd get schools and come say, well, just tell me what you want me to do. And I made a habit of holding their brochures. And I'd pull the brochure out and I'd slide it across the table to them and said, that was the promise. Right? So what do I want you to do? I want you to fulfill the promise. And they say the great things about promises is there isn't fine print in them.
You're actually bringing me to a time I'm recalling now. I hadn't thought about this before, when I was doing some work in DC. And there was a third-party group that was holding a design incubator. So imagine a think tank for community members who maybe wanted to come up with an idea, right? So I'm attaching this idea promise duo. So folks, paid whatever money, you get into this think tank, and they asked me and some of my colleagues to come as kind of like reviewers, right? As folks went along this day. And there's two groups I'm thinking about, and both had what I thought were really awesome, innovative ideas that would really support schools in the DC area. One group went on and now has a charter that's been existing for, I guess, oh my gosh, 17 years now. The other group, super solid idea, never got off the ground. And so let's think about this idea piece. Mary, what have you seen to be effective design and planning processes that charter schools take advantage of?
First and foremost, effective design starts with a deep understanding of the community the school hopes to serve. Not just demographics, but aspirations, challenges, and gaps in the current system. And so I think it's great to have an idea, but how does that idea really fit in and serve the community that you're intending to serve? The strongest school designs are grounded in clear mission. They're backed by a compelling and strong educational model, and also aligned with the school's operational and financial plan from day one. And I think for me, when those things aren't aligned, that's when we typically see that there's going to be challenges. And so it also means that, for all of those things, whether it's the educational model and the operations and financial plan, is having the right people in place. Strong leadership matters. We all know this in schools. And whether it's the leader of the school, their team, committed board members, do they all understand the instructional vision? Do they all understand the reality of starting a school from scratch? So it's not just about a great idea and passion. It's about preparedness, making sure everything's aligned. And the best designs really bring all that together: vision, voice, viability, and really are paying attention to that. Not just, do we have, the right, curriculum? Do we have the right, teachers? It's everything combined, academically, financially, operationally, and that everybody's in on it and there's strong leadership to make sure it can be fulfilled.
I really love that one. And one of the things I think about when you talk about alignment, especially between that academic plan, right? All of the parts of the plan and the budget, and those two things speaking to each other, I think are really strong pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing too is, making sure that everything's realistic. I've seen some unrealistic things in there and in different plans. and making sure that's where the authorizer can come into play too, because they've seen it, right? They can talk to the founding team members and the team that's going to be starting the school, and as they are in operation year one, is making sure that, they help to point out some of those things as well.
Mary, you've seen so many people start schools, some successfully, some not. Some begin the process, not finish it. It's kind of romantic to think you're going to start a school, but you're also going to end up giving blood, sweat, and tears to do it. What would you tell somebody that's thinking about starting a school? Would you try and talk them out of it, or would you encourage them? Like, what do they have to understand about the system, the money, the people, the work, the hours, the sacrifice that it requires?
It's energizing, right, at first, and I'm always encouraging. I think ideas, even if they start, simply, can be developed, and they can be fostered and cultivated and everything else. And having the right people in the seats to do that is really key. So the first thing is, do you have the right people, partnerships, thought process behind this? And so have you talked to the community? Have you talked to different partners in the community? Have you talked to, others that can really help you to bring this alive and make it make sense? I also, really encourage people not to just focus on the idea and the mission and the academic model, but like I stated before, the most successful ones focus on governance, operations, financial planning, and make sure that, these exciting ideas can be supported. And so with me, like, some of the missteps I've seen is also informing, right? And so there's a complexity of launching a school. There's a complexity of operating a school that some people, I think, sometimes overlook and don't think about those nuances that come into play. So making sure they have the right systems and capacity to execute, making sure they have the right partnerships, making sure that they understand what enrollment is going to look like, and how to encourage and talk with families and have community partnerships that can assist. I think that's really important. And I think also is not just focusing on the ideal student that could be attending, but also planning for all students, diverse learners that they'll actually be serving, including students with disabilities, English learners, those that may need additional support for different reasons. And so I think my encouragement is always to really go through that process and have that clear understanding of long-term sustainability, not just to open, but to really thrive and grow in the future. And so starting with that great idea is great, but like bringing in the right people, the right ideas, and then in partnerships, but then also focusing on the stuff that really is going to matter in that long-term sustainability.
That's right. One of the things, I have an operational background in schools. And one of the things that folks used to ask me when I was serving in those roles were like, okay, so what does that mean? You're in operations at a school. I said, well, there's an entire business aspect to running schools that sometimes if you're in the teacher space or if you're a parent, right, you may not recognize or see. And I love bringing that business analogy in here. And so it's like you have this idea and you basically need to write a business plan. And we call that a charter application. And then you got to submit that business plan to someone who's going to review it and make a determination, right? And so basically taking that idea and making that official promise, that document or that body of work has to go to what we call authorizers. So think about it. You have a business plan. You got to submit it to an authority that is authorizing in the charter space. So Mary, from your experience, what has separated the strong applications from ones that may not be as strong?
Yeah, I think, going along the same, things that you're saying, I think it does really matter that there's not just a coherent and compelling story. That's number one of, the early stages in the application, but it connects the mission to the model to the staffing to the budget. Everything is aligned. And like you're talking about is like a lot of people focus on that school leader. Well, that school leader also has a lot on their plate. They, they have to make sure that their team is supported, that things are starting strong. And so those operational and financial expertise is really key as well. because they can help to see how everything's connected. They can connect the dots. They can work with the school leader to make sure that, everything's aligned. That's really important. And it's also clear that for the strongest applications that they've done their homework. So aside from the plan, do they understand the community? And do they have the capacity to execute? And that goes along, do they have the right team in place? Do they have a deep understanding of the community? They're also honest about challenges and realistic about growth. I think, recognizing those challenges, how they're going to overcome them potentially, but also realistic about growth and enrollment, also realistic about fundraising. And so strong applications sometimes have a plan A and a plan B, whether it's around, budgets and fundraising. If we don't get the fundraising, this is what's going to look like. Facilities is another one. Do they have a plan A and a plan B? And plan C and D sometimes in some situations. And so really looking at those applications, making sure they're all connected, aligned, but they also have a realistic plan in place. It's not just a strong vision. It's everything that's going to go behind it to make sure that they can fulfill it.
Mary, this conversation is making me go back memory lane because the National Charter Schools Institute used to run a program called Running the Business of Charter Schools. And the whole point was the reason you exist is for kids in education. But if you don't run the business well, you can't stay in business to do that work. And then the other part that makes me smile is I'm thinking of Susie Miller Corello, who used to run the State University of New York's charter school authorizing, now in Florida. But she always said authorizers are venture bureaucrats. What she meant by that is you're a government agency or a public agency, but you are like a venture capitalist. You're placing bets on people that are coming to you with dreams and plans.
And that's what's really important too is, the authorizer's conversation with the applicant, right? And my favorite part of the whole application process is those capacity interviews and really understanding, yes, you have a great written application, but, is everybody on the same page in fulfilling this? And also, is it not a template that you took from somebody else and said, well, they got approved? And so I think that's really an important piece of those conversations and understanding, is there a coherent, plan? Is there authenticity behind it? And is there clarity across the founding team?
Mary, how important is communications in all of this, right? So one way to look at charter schools is you got to be able to attract people, right? You got to be able to attract students, which is attracting parents and families. You got to be able to attract teachers, right? Leaders, support team. And it seems like a lot of attraction comes down to your ability to communicate. What do you see is there any difference in groups that are successful or not, just based on something as simple as how they communicate and how proactively they communicate?
Yeah, I think the most successful ones have over communicated. They have done not just to check a box to say we've done community engagement, but they've truly done authentic community engagement with a lot of different stakeholders, including families and students. And then there's the communication amongst the founding team that, I've seen some applicants come in and it's clear that not everybody understands really the model that they're proposing. And they haven't even really had enough conversations internally. And then the communication with the authorizer, I think, is really important, is from whether it's through the application or startup, is keeping those lines of communication open, being very honest about where the current state is. If you're having trouble with facility, talk to the authorizer right away. Have those conversations because there can be some, assistance with some authorizers and agencies, the city. There can be some connections that can be made. There also can be some delays if a school isn't ready and they're running into challenges that weren't expected. And so that proactive, open communication across the entire process, I think, is really important.
Mary, is every charter school unique, or are there patterns and trends that if you wanted to start a school, you could learn from those that have gone before you?
Yeah, I think definitely learning from those that have gone before you is key. Anytime somebody approaches me and talks about opening a new school or even replication expansion, I always point them to say, hey, go talk to, right? And I think that's really important. We do those connections all the time here at the Institute, is people will reach out to us And we help to connect them with others that have learned through their experience, and also have some really good insight, or knowledge that they could benefit from, whether that's because they're in the same geographic area, they're with the same authorizer, they have a similar model or similar experience. So I think, connecting and learning from those who have gone before is really a valuable thing that a new applicant can do.
Specifically in a stage that's really hard. And that's the stage where, all right, this team has gotten approved. And so everybody's excited. Yay, we got approved. And everybody's thinking about day one. But what I don't think a lot of people realize is just how much work has to go into what we call year zero, which is the time between you've got an official approval that you can open a school, and 9 times out of 10, you have a year, sometimes 2 years before the first day of school where you're welcoming students into your space. And so one of the things that I've noticed is that organizations who get approved and start visiting other schools that are either in their same authorizer portfolio or similar demographic or geographic area and learn from others who walk that path before them do really well. So Mary, do you have a powerful example of a school that really spent their preparing to open stage, that year zero, doing some things well or some lessons learned?
This is really important because we still too often see schools closing within the first 2 years or the first 5 years of operation. And that's disruptive in a lot of ways. And so that year zero, that pre-opening stage, that planning year is extremely important. I don't believe we can tie those failures down to like a weak application or approval process, even in a lot of cases. We often sometimes see that they're not ready to open, and they don't have, things in place. So that planning year is really important. And sometimes they're granted 2 years to plan, according to the situation. They may need more, an extra time. I once worked with a school that was delayed in its opening by a year when its founding team realized they weren't ready. They had some issues with fully staffing their school, and they also had a facilities issue. They had some alternatives, but after talking about it, and that goes into that proactive communication, it was decided, and I think they took the right step in saying, can we have a delay? And so they asked for that proactively, and it was a hard decision for them because they'd put the sweat, the tears, everything into getting to that day one of opening, and they had to stop and pause and say, can we do this? Can we fulfill our promise? And so they had to go back and strengthen some things. And when they were ready to open, their culture was in place, the academic program, all the staffing, their facility was ready, and they were really, able to recover from that rocky start. And so I think that's important. On the flip side, when there isn't delay, what I've seen most successful are those that really are planning anywhere from the culture, building the culture in the team, all the way into making sure that everything is ready, and that they've gone through and they're well prepared. They've thought of everything. They've proactively communicated, identified the challenges that they're running into and how to overcome them. And so I really think it's a combination of staying on top of that, being honest about where you are in the process, and so that you're ready to truly open on that day one. So it's a lot of reflection all through that planning year and that communication between the team that's building it and then also with the authorizer.
That's right. I love the adage, like sometimes you got to take the time to save the time. So taking that proactive time, taking it slower and making sure things are tight can save time on the back end for sure. I want to share something with you all. So, something that has happened in my personal life has been really interesting. So, now my own brother's children are school aged. And so, while I don't myself have children, I'm not technically a parent, but I have a lot of insight into the education space. So, my brother and sister-in-law have questions for me, my cousins. And so, I find that in my own family and community, parents want to understand, right, what this whole thing about schools are. And in one of my conversations, I'm sharing about the state report card and how you analyze how one school's doing versus another. And I'm realizing like just how much parents want to know, but don't always have access to. And most of those conversations is that they want the best for their child or their children. And they want to really understand if I'm going to commit to a school for whatever length of time, how do I make sure that that school is going to perform just as well in 7 years as it is right now? And so, Mary, what this is coming at is like success isn't just about surviving or making it through the application phase, but it's about thriving continuously. So, how do we help schools not just meet milestones or not just meet their charter goals, but continuously improve?
Thriving schools are learning organizations. They're looking at not only where they are today, but where they want to be. And I think, thriving schools also don't see charter goals as the finish line. They see them as a basic starting point. And I think that continuous improvement starts with a culture of reflection and honesty. And that's really paired with actionable data and things that they're doing and strong leadership. And they need to have that space to support to ask the hard questions, test ideas, and make mid-course corrections. And I think when that's encouraged, when that's reflected on, that's when you see a school thriving. Is they're in that constant like learning mode. They're in that constant like reflection and what's going forward mode. And I think that's really key. And you can feel that a lot of the times. And I think it's important is like when you walk into a school, you kind of feel that culture, but also you see that reflected in just the conversations that are being had. And so as parents listen and learn about a school, those are really important things to understand is like, are they constantly learning? Are they communicating? What does that look like? Are they transparent and open? And I think even that conversation, whether it's with an authorizer or other, people that are involved in the school, it's that constant, understanding that, yes, we're here, but this is where we want to go. So it is that thriving ones are in that constant continuous improvement stage. So even if they're high performing, what's our next? What are we doing to really fulfill the mission for parents and families?
I'll jump in and say, I take it to my days as a teacher. And so I'm relating it to how I'm using data as a educator and really understanding every student that's in my room. And one of the things that I had to learn over time, I did not have it right that first year, let's be very clear about that, was that I had to be real clear on where all of my students were. And so if there was even one student who missed a concept or didn't quite grasp what something meant, it was well worth my time to make sure that I found ways to ensure that in the following weeks, I didn't just skip over that fact and move on to the next part of the unit, but I made sure to figure out what can I do differently as this child's teacher to help them to understand the concept that I'm trying to relay. And I'll be honest, for a new teacher, that's really hard because you've got this unit plan, you've got folks telling you how much time you do and don't have because the test is coming. It's easy to get caught up in the adult pieces of this puzzle and not pay attention to where your kids are. And so earlier we said you got to take time to save time. I had to learn that it was worth me taking the time to make sure I wasn't actually leaving kids behind. And I don't mean that in that political sense, but I meant it in my classroom. And I was making sure that my kids and I were lock in step. And I'll be honest, I had 6 different classes. They all look different. So there were 2 classes I was right on par with my unit plan with. My other ones I was behind, and I had to understand that for the adult serving those kids, that was the most important thing to do. So that's my direct correlation to that.
Mary, remember my parents were educators, right? And my dad was more of a philosopher. My mom was more of a pragmatist. And I appreciate both. But I say that to say this. When you launch a school, there's going to be trouble, no matter how well planned and prepared you are. And trouble takes time. And so one of the things I'm really interested in is what's the leaders, the team's ability to handle trouble, deal with it, and get back on task, right? Keeping the main thing the main thing. Well, one of my dad's sayings is learning is incidental to the operation of schools. And people hear that, they chuckle. But when you actually think about it, there are people that know how to run schools, but there really isn't learning taking place. And yes, you got to be able to run the business of a school, but you really need to specialize in learning. And I think that is really key to this charter world because it's easy enough to get them mixed up. Mary, a hallmark of charters is that it's not a right, it's a privilege. And once you get that opportunity to start and operate a school, serve kids, get public money, you got to go through this renewal process, right? Um, Sometimes we call it proving the promise. Will you talk to us a little bit about how do schools, how do authorizers, how do boards think about the renewal process? How should they think about the process? And how do we take the mystery out of it?
I like to say renewal should be a non-event. I think we're seeing authorizers move this way, and I think I encourage them to. That means that they're transparent, they're open, schools understand on an annual basis, are they meeting the authorizer's expectations in the authorizer's eyes? The school should be constantly reflecting even themselves, how are we doing, not only against the authorizer's standards and expectations, but how are we doing against our own goals? How are we doing? So the school shouldn't be surprised, because I always say the authorizer expectations and renewal should be the floor. Like, your goals and what you're trying to accomplish and provide students is well beyond that. And so, on an annual basis, schools should be reflecting, boards should be reflecting. How are we doing? How are we doing as a school against our own goals that we have set? And then also paying attention, how are we doing against our authorizers' expectations? Looking at the authorizer reports that they provide on an annual basis. So when it gets to renewal time, there's no surprises. It should be a non-event. The authorizer knows how the school is doing. The school knows how they're doing. They're on track. And so I always encourage, if you have a great process throughout the year on your annual evaluations, and the schools are doing that continuous improvement, they're reflecting already how they're doing. The authorizer is sharing how they're doing. And it really should be that time of reflection. And I like to look at renewals like, yes, reflect back. But the most important part of renewal, and the thing that always excited me, was looking forward. What are you going to do your next 5 years, your next 10 years? Like, what are your plans? What are you hoping to accomplish? What are you providing to your students? I always like to have those conversations about, what's your hopes and dreams? Like, what's your next goals? Even high performing schools, some high schools that were extremely high performing, we'd have these conversations about, what's next? What do your students need? What are you finding as you're listening to them? Whether that's, we want to expand our CTE program. We want to offer, more early college offerings. And even in the K-8 is, we're really knocking it out of the park compared to all these schools around us, but we want to do more. We want to prepare our students for that high school, next stage. And so I really think that renewal process should be a non-event. However, the event should be what's next.
Well, as we get ready to come to the end of our time, I love that you brought up the concept of, like, what's the future goals? And so, Mary, as you think about the future for all of us who are a part of the charter school ecosystem, what do you think the future holds, especially as the needs of students and communities are evolving?
One thing that everybody across the charter sector needs to reflect on is what's our intent? And I always say, go back to the original intent of charter schools. It wasn't to check boxes. It wasn't to operate schools that look like the school down the street necessarily. It was to offer choice. And so reflect on that. Are we offering the choice that parents and students want and need? How are we engaging with them to understand that? And then also, I think most importantly is, yes, reflect on that, but realize we're part of a greater ecosystem. And so in the education sector, in communities, we're part of this bigger thing. And so even as a charter school, how am I reflecting on that? How am I reflecting I'm part of this ecosystem and not just the standalone school? And as authorizers, board members, other people, how are we part of this greater ecosystem that has greater choice beyond charters now? and reflecting, what am I offering in this for parents and families? And so I think going back to whether it's the original intent of charter schools, whether it's the original intent of your charter when you were filling out your application and you had hopes and dreams, as an authorizer, what am I doing to help cultivate this educational ecosystem, with whether that's our current schools, potential new schools and new ideas? How are we playing a part in this greater scheme of everything?
Absolutely. Well, Mary, thank you for this gift. Your knowledge and your understanding of the charter school life cycle is really special. And I love that you've taken this conversation and helped us realize that these ideas, when they're put into the charter application, they're promises. They're promises to students, to families, and to communities. And so once we kind of have that charter school going, it's our commitment, it's our duty to make sure we are being really good stewards when we think about the budget and the finances, the operations, the academics, because we've got to hold true to our promises. And so, friends, I want to keep you guys coming back. And next time, we're digging really deeply into how schools and their founding boards can really co-create visions of success with the charter school application. And this is an episode you will not want to miss.
And to our listeners, I've got a challenge for you. I want you to think about charter schools and the communities they serve. What's one big bold by choice step you can take right now to help strengthen a charter school, wherever it's at in its life cycle? And I want to invite you to join our charter network. This is something that brings you together with experts, peers from around the country, people like you that are passionate about making a difference for kids and the adults who serve them. And remember, vision matters, but so does execution. And that's what we're trying to share with you in Bold by Choice. Let's go and win for kids.
So friends, make sure you hit subscribe, leave us a review, and we'll see you next time on the Bold by Choice podcast, where leadership, innovation, and impact come to life.